It's Melvin Yong.
Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the motion. The COVID-19 pandemic has been an unprecedented crisis that has impacted the entire world. Our lives have been upended, and we have had to learn to adapt to a new normal. Today, I'd like to pay a special tribute to our workers in the air, sea, and land transport sectors. They have collectively kept Singapore connected, kept Singaporeans moving, and ensured that we continue to have access to essential goods and services, right from the very beginning and throughout the pandemic. Our transport workers showed up to work every day, despite the uncertainties surrounding how deadly and contagious the virus could be. They set aside their fears and kept our airways open, our sea lanes flowing, and our buses and trains moving for all of us. As a transport unionist at the front line, I've witnessed firsthand how the government, the unions, and our corporations come together to overcome crisis after crisis and emerge stronger together. Amidst the many uncertainties throughout the pandemic, new COVID clusters, new virus variants, travel bubbles forming and popping, what was certain for the tripartite partners was that we knew that we had each other's back. Let me elaborate. I start with aviation. The pandemic severely disrupted the global economy, but the aviation industry, a vital part of global connectivity, had to keep moving. Despite being at a high risk of contracting the virus, our air crew and those working at our airport worked tirelessly and selflessly to ensure that all flights coming through Singapore remain safe and secure. They worked long hours, sacrificed personal comfort, having to don cumbersome PPEs, and put in extra efforts to uphold the highest standards of safety, sanitation, and service on board our flights and at the airport. They did so to transport essential supplies and to bring back our loved ones stranded far away when global travel came to a virtual standstill. One example is Jessica Chua, a stewardess with Scoot, who was among the crew that was deployed on a flight to Wuhan in February 2020 to deliver humanitarian assistance from the Singapore government and to return over 170 Singaporeans and their family members back home to Singapore. Soon after, the magnitude of the impact of the pandemic set in, and many aviation workers were faced with the sobering prospects of an uncertain future. But the tripartite partners were quick to step in. The NTUC worked closely with the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore and SkillsFuture Singapore to launch the Enhanced Training Support Package to help companies retain and reskill their workers instead of retrenching them. The NTUC's Job Security Council also worked closely with the Public Service Division to place more than 4,000 aviation workers on secondary employment in areas such as healthcare and public transport. Sir, throughout the pandemic, our aviation workers have shown us what it means to be resilient. During the ministerial statement on aviation recovery in October 2020, I had asked the Minister for Transport, why was SIA operating flights to countries that Singaporeans were not allowed to travel to? The Minister explained that there were some flights, although the load factor is low, SIA would continue to fly to maintain a minimum connectivity network, to maintain our presence in those markets. So even though the load factor is low, the government would support SIA to continue these flights and to mount cargo flights so that our supply chain is not affected. Sir, it is the foresight of such policy decisions and the resilience of aviation workers like Jessica Chua and many others that Singapore's aviation sector has rebounded as quickly as it has. allowing Changi Airport to regain its crown as the world's best airport at the 2023 World Airport Awards. Singapore Airlines was also named Airline of the Year last month by Air Transport World and ranked top global airline by Fortune magazine in its February issue. Next, let me extend my appreciations to all the seafarers and port workers who bravely continued their work during the pandemic, often against all odds, to ensure that our supply chains remain operational during the most challenging of times. When global air passenger demand evaporated almost overnight, the demand for cargo increased exponentially. Unseen and unheard, our maritime workers worked around the clock to ensure that essential goods and services continue to flow into Singapore during the pandemic. Sir, seafarers and port workers have always played a critical role in global trade and commerce. But the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed just how essential their work really is. Without our maritime workers, we would not have had the medicine, food, fuel, and other vital supplies that we needed to navigate the pandemic. Our maritime workers helped keep our economies running and our communities fed and provisioned, even as the rest of the world was brought to a standstill. But our seafarers did not have an easy time during the pandemic. They endured unimaginable hardships and uncertainty. They risked infection and severe illness. Many were stuck on board their ships for months on due to travel restrictions and border closures, unable to return home to their families and loved ones. Yet they persevered to keep our global supply chains open. In response, Singapore's tripartite partners established a world-class floating crew facilitation center and a $1 million Singapore Shipping Tripartite Alliance Resilience Fund to facilitate crew changes to take place in Singapore, helping hundreds of thousands of seafarers return home safely. Such efforts were vital in ensuring the safety and welfare of our maritime workers while keeping supply chains open, even during the worst of the pandemic. Last but certainly not least, I would like to acknowledge and thank the many land transport workers who have been silently working to keep our country moving during the pandemic, including during the circuit breaker period. Sir, our bus and rail workers and our taxi and private hire drivers put their lives on the line every day to provide us with safe transportation services. Every time they interact with passengers, they are exposed to the risk of contracting the virus. Despite taking precautions such as wearing masks, using sanitizers, and maintaining social distancing, they remain at a high risk of exposure. Yet they persisted in discharging their duties. The risk of infection is real, which was evident when the highly transmissible new Delta variant started spreading rapidly at our bus interchanges. At its peak in September 2021, we had more than 100 bus captains down with COVID, impacting normal bus services. Non-infected bus captains were worried. Will they get the virus too? And will they pass it to their family members at home? But instead of staying away, they worked extra hours and stood in for their quarantined colleagues. The tripartite partners also came together to enhance infection control measures at all bus interchanges. The COVID clusters were eventually closed in October that year, slightly less than 2 months after the first cluster was detected. Additionally, public transport workers were constantly facing the challenges of enforcing mandatory mask wearing and social distancing policies. They were often subjected to verbal and physical abuse from passengers who simply refused to follow these regulations. It was therefore a huge disappointment when the number of abuse cases against our bus captains jumped from 26 cases in 2018 to 50 in 2020. In quick response, the National Transport Workers Union rallied the public transport operators and the Land Transport Authority to take a firm stance against abusive passengers. The tripartite partners signed an MOU to provide public transport workers with guaranteed legal support to pursue civil action against their abusers beyond criminal prosecution. The signal was clear, and the number of abuse cases against bus captains fell sharply the following year in 2021. Sir, we must also not forget the contributions made by our delivery riders. Throughout the pandemic, they were instrumental in ensuring that we could get our food and other basic supplies even when we were in home quarantine. Many hawkers too relied on their services to stay afloat, especially when dining in was prohibited. To all our delivery riders out there, thank you for bridging the vital last mile gap, rain or shine. In conclusion, COVID-19 has been the greatest test that our generation has seen. Many unsung heroes have come together to ensure that we emerge stronger from the pandemic. Today, I place on record our sincere appreciation to the many men and women who work in the transport industry for keeping Singapore connected and keeping all of us moving even during the darkest of times. May their contributions be remembered by all of us always. Sir, I support the motion.